G'day and welcome to the Drive Able podcast. My name is Brad Williams, and unfortunately my partner Ali Akbariam is unable to join us today. He has technical issues. His computer and internet has let him down, so he's not joining me today for this podcast. Today though, I'm going to do this by myself, and we are talking about high-level assessment vehicles for driver training and assessments. And we're talking about driving from wheelchairs when standard hand controls in standard sedans aren't going to meet your needs. For this subject, we're going to be talking to Paul Crake. Now, you might remember Paul Crake from episode 38. Now, we spoke to him about his journey with driving. You might also remember that he was an extreme athlete prior to his injuries, but how this drive and personality helped him to develop total ability. Now, if you haven't heard episode 38 yet, we highly recommend that you go back and have a listen. In that episode, we promised to get him back on to talk about Total Ability, the company. Well, it's now been some 40 episodes later, and we finally have been able to pin him down in his very busy schedule. So absolute privilege to have him on today. Unfortunately, Ali couldn't join him. We couldn't postpone it any longer. So it's just me having a chat with him. So let's get him on.
Welcome to the Drive Able podcast, where each episode you get to listen to two of Australia's leading professionals in the area of driving and community mobility for people with disabilities. In each episode, they interview drivers, carers, and industry experts and share the insider's guide to driving with a disability. Here are your hosts, Brad and Ollie.
Hi everybody, I'm really excited to get into today's interview, but before we get started, we just want to do a quick shout out to our sponsors that make this show possible, Mobility Engineering and Williams OT. This show takes a lot of time and money to put together, so we want to thank our sponsors for bringing you this podcast today. And today we have Paul Crake from Total Ability joining us. G'day Paul, how you going?
Good, thanks Brad.
That's good. Now, we interviewed you way back in episode 38. And we, as we said in the intro, in that episode, we spoke to you about your journey from being an athlete through to suffering an injury and now getting back into driving. And we hinted at you starting Total Ability at that time. But what we want you to do is reintroduce yourself for the people that didn't listen to episode 38. In fact, I encourage everyone to go back and listen to that. It's a great episode. But for the people that haven't done that yet, can you just give us a little intro to yourself and give us a little highlight of episode 38?
Yeah, sure, Brad. So I'm a T4 paraplegic. I had a push bike accident just on 18 years ago. And prior to that, I'd been a professional cyclist and runner. So, yeah, life was it was a tumultuous period for me to a degree because life had been turned upside down. Going from sport being my entire life to all of a sudden being restricted to the wheelchair. So I've got obviously a good first-hand experience of what this is like and obviously the journey that we go through. Piecing our life back together, and obviously where driving plays into that. And so I, post-accident, returned, to my hometown Canberra for a few months with my family, then moved back to Italy, where I was previously been cycling. And I spent 4 years living in Italy. So it was during that period that I discovered what was actually available back in 2008 with driving controls over there. And then in 2011, started to bring some of that equipment back to Australia. And that's where obviously we crossed paths, Brad, back in, I think, probably 2013 around.
It was about then, yeah, because in 2018, I did my heavy vehicle course and learned all about trucks and so forth. And I was in Sydney, and I was doing a whole lot of PD at that time. And I reckon that's when you were first really out there at all the expos and things, and we love expos, Ali and I, in regards to getting out there and sharing and learning new information. And I reckon I learned about total ability, way back then in those early stages. Can you talk to us more about how that got started and how total, if people want to learn about Paul's journey, go back and listen to episode 38. This episode is all about the journey of total ability. So in those early stages, how did you get it going in Australia? How did you get those products that you'd seen in Italy? How did you get them up and going in Australia? And is it different now to how it was back then pre-NDIS?
Yeah, it was very different, Brad, because we were trying to a degree re-educate the occupational therapists with new equipment that they'd never seen before. So an inherent nature, we're putting someone behind the wheel, so you're going to always be risk averse. So so there was a lot of time spent getting in the vehicle with occupational therapists like yourself, as I did with you in the early days, and showing how I was driving with hand controls and how it was different from the old school systems, and how I could reduce my fatigue while driving even short distances, let alone long interstate trips. So yeah, there was a lot of time spent working with and showing OTs in particular the ways that we were the new systems, and then that flowed on to working with the driving instructors, and then at the same time tied in with obviously providing that technical support to the workshops. So that we've always had a good network of workshops throughout Australia. That's grown more so in the last 10 years. But the workshops were really wanting to just have technical understanding and support of when they came to install these products, because they hadn't really seen these products before. So it was a multi-pronged approach, and that was before NDIS that we started really on this journey. And then obviously through NDIS, obviously that's opened up the opportunities for the participant, we'll say, as far as those funding options.
Yeah, and I remember, with that trip over to Sydney to do the course, Paul took me for a drive around Sydney in his car, and I was blown away, absolutely blown away by the controls at that point of time, and was going, this is next level, because at that time, the most common hand controls were very mechanical push-pull hand controls, and very mechanical push radial hand controls. So push for braking with a bar attached to the brake pedal, and a mechanism to mechanically pull the accelerator pedal on the floor, or push the accelerator pedal on the floor from behind. So that was in the very early days when I first started doing driving assessments. And then Paul basically introduced me to electronic style accelerators, which I want to thank you for while I'm talking to you here, because it is something that has changed the world for so many drivers. You mentioned fatigue levels, and that's the first thing that I can recognize when I talk about the total ability controls. And what you've done, Paul, is you've upped the ante of everybody here in Australia. So let's talk a little bit about those types of controls and how you got them through. Like, was there engineering standards that you had to get through in Australia? Was it difficult to do that in the early stages with the electronic stuff compared to the mechanical stuff that was out there at that time?
Yes, but I took a very upfront and honest approach from the get-go, and we actually took a vehicle with the equipment to pretty much every single state transport authority and presented the equipment and took them for a drive and explained to them how it was working and how it was integrating with the vehicle's factory electronics. So, and then that obviously combined with the certification testing papers, enabled us to obviously start installing it nationally, so not just in one state but all states. So, and I don't think anyone had really done that before. So, and like for example, when we introduced the product in New Zealand, it was about an 18-month process for us to get our type approval for us to be able to install the product over there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the approach I've always taken is, go to the authorities and actually be upfront and honest about what you're trying to achieve, and showing them firsthand how the equipment's actually working.
The other thing that I really appreciate, and I'll get you to expand on it, is you're linking in with driving instructors in those early days, and even to this day now, the linking in with driving instructors so people can actually have a go. That's the bit, because most people had some kind of mechanical control in their car, very, very farm-like machinery, very welded together, not always the best comfort or anything else like that. But you got in there with driving instructors. Can you tell us about that philosophy and how that's working these days?
Yeah, so I saw from the outset that driving instructors hadn't really been given any support whatsoever in Australia. So obviously it was expensive to fit a vehicle in the early days for a driving instructor, and the options available were quite limited. And those options were generally restricted to the capital cities. It was rare for us to see a driving instructor vehicle with mods fitted in a rural location. And honestly, in Australia, that's where you really need to see that service available. And as a paraplegic, I was like, we've got to change this. So that's been one of my key focuses with the business over the last 10, 12 years, is just educating the driving instructors, so that they're more familiar about what's out there and available, how the industry works, and the next steps as they decide to get mods fitted. So yeah, we work with numerous instructors nationally, and I get a buzz going for a drive with driving instructors and showing them nuances on how I as a user work with the equipment. And it's funny, to this day, I'll learn something from a driving instructor and they'll learn something from me.
Yeah. And yeah, we're always learning from each other, absolutely. But it was a big money investment to put hand controls in your car as a driving instructor. I mean, even I had to do that, even though we're working in the disability field all the time, every day. But to pay for modifications to go into a car, and then fingers crossed people are going to use it and it's not going to get in the way and all those type of things. You've really helped out people along the way, driving instructors, with that risk avoidance, and that's meant that it's become available to a lot more people. The next thing that I want to talk to you about is that you then took it to a whole new level. Now, people watching on YouTube, Paul's got a picture of one of his vans behind him. So just describing that for our listeners who aren't on YouTube. Talk to us about that next step that you took, whether it was in the early stages or not, but what's happened now in regards to your vans around Australia. And when we're talking about vans, explain why you have these vans, what's in the vans, and that next level of hand controls.
So, Brad, there's only so much equipment we can put into a mainstream driving instructor vehicle, and all driving instructor vehicles are sedan type vehicles. They're not suitable for drive from wheelchair. So we started to get, back in 2014, 15, we started to get requests from the industry about, what about how we meant to assess when we've got a client in a wheelchair, and they want to drive from the wheelchair. So then we opted to put our first van on the road. So that was in 2015, and that was drive from wheelchair with pretty much, we threw all our mods available from 5DL into that van. And so we're talking 11, 12 accelerator systems, mini wheel steering, voice command, joystick steering, the works, and it's the ultimate assessment platform for the OT now, because you can interchange and mix and match the equipment in the space of a few minutes, and you don't even have to go for a drive. You can literally have the vehicle running stationary and be interchanging those different solutions and see, oh yeah, that works, or no, that doesn't work. And so it proved successful in the first van. What put us under pressure was the fact that that van was basically being transported around Australia, and logistically, it just wasn't. We weren't able to provide the service to the driving instructors and the OTs.
Yeah, I remember those days. Like you're in high demand and waiting for a van to come and explaining to a client, it's going to be in here in October next year. I remember those days, but it's grown from then. So now you've got a bit of a fleet. Is that right? So where did it go to from there?
Yeah, so we've now got 5 vans in Australia. So we've got a van based in Queensland, a van in West Australia, one here in Sydney, one in Victoria, and we've got a van. I'm not sure if I missed. We've got a van
about South Australia.
Yeah, South Australia and Tasmania. One floats between those 2 states.
Yep.
So yeah, the only vans that really move now are the ones a little bit between New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, and Tasmania. So, but yeah, we've 5 vans on the road, and now we can give the likes of yourself, driving instructor, driving OT, those dates all the way through to mid next year, as far as when that van's going to be available. And basically, we provide the van, we provide training to the driving instructors, and then the driving instructor is left their own devices to work alongside the client and the occupational therapist to do those on-road assessments, and if deemed, those follow-up driving lessons.
Yeah, so for people that are interested, we've spoken to Mark Fraser, who's one of the driving instructors here in South Australia, where I'm recording from today. Paul's based in Sydney today. We're a national podcast, but we've spoken to one of the driving instructors that does the driving lessons in these vans. And it really is an all-in-one van. There is so many things in vans. Now, Paul rattled off a few things just earlier, and he made it sound like, we all know what everything is in those vans. But Paul, can you go through some of the items that maybe are in these vans that might excite somebody with a disability, maybe a spinal cord injury, a high-level spinal cord injury, maybe a C5, 6, 7 type of injury, or maybe they've got a quadriplegic type disability. Can you talk through some of the products that are in those vans, and what's a mini wheel as an example? What are these little things that are in these cars that people, for our people with disabilities that are listening to this, or even driver OTs that are new to this world, what are these things? What do they actually mean, these titles that you listed off before?
Okay, so all the vans are set up to be drive from wheelchair, and 4 of those 5 vans have got sufficient floor modifications to allow clients to normally go in their own power chair. And from there, once they're in that driving position, we can start with a very mainstream modification, such as a left foot accelerator. And then we can go up to hand control, such as a combined brake accelerator or a radial accelerator, push-pull accelerator, an over-ring accelerator, satellite accelerators. So they're all what we deem as sort of mainstream mods these days. So just because someone's drive from wheelchair doesn't mean they're driving with complex modifications as far as driving mods. Yeah. So, and then from there we go up to the more sophisticated modifications.
Then we're talking more issues with the upper limb. So the hand controls, the mainstream hand controls, you need to have fairly good upper limbs, good shoulders, good elbows to a point, and potentially some dexterity in your hands. but then we go up to where the disability impacts the upper limbs, and then we can start talking about what's involved there, Paul.
Yeah, so then we're going to this higher tier of modification, which is for those high level quads, or those with those significantly reduced strength and functionality in the arms.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would start with something like a mini wheel steering. So you're not actually operating the original steering wheel anymore. You're operating a little turn wheel, and that's operating the steering wheel. Likewise, we've got a sledge brake system, which is providing full power assisted brake, and that can be mounted anywhere. All these high level controls are customizable and can be mounted on control arms, so we can position them basically anywhere within reach of the driver. So to the extent that we can even put a joystick, four-way joystick, into the footwell of the vehicle. So the joystick is the most sophisticated driving mod we've got in the vans, and that's a four-way joystick that side to side does the steering, forwards does the brake, backwards does the accelerator. Okay, yeah, and that would often be combined with voice command. Now, in saying that, we would only consider an option like that whereby someone doesn't have the strength or functionality to operate more mainstream controls.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a process of elimination, isn't it? When we do these assessments, we go, well, what's the mainstream way of driving, which is hands on the steering wheel, foot on the pedals. If that doesn't work, and the feet on the pedals aren't working, then how do we overcome that? And then if the arms aren't able to steer the steering wheel, how do we overcome that? And then if you can't do the electronics that are on your steering column, your indicators, your wipers and those so forth, and we might do voice control where you say wipers on and the wipers come on, or right indicator on and the indicator comes on. It's a world of possibilities, these vans, and your website has these items listed. So if anyone's interested in understanding more about these items, I encourage you to go and I'm sure Paul does too, go and have a look at the Total Ability website, totalability.com.au, and go and have a bit of an explore about what these controls actually are. So if you're going, what is a mini wheel, or what is a overring, you can go onto the website and have a bit of a look. So that's a wonderful insight to these vans, and they really are such complex pieces of equipment that is the assessment process when working with OTs longer, Paul, to be able to test all these things out?
The assessment process is longer, primarily in part because we've got to get, obviously, the person positioned into the driver behind the steering wheel.
Yep.
And if they're in the power wheelchair, obviously there's going to be a bit more time spent there. I should also note that we'll have a client that maybe doesn't have any arms but is walking, and so we'll use the van for that assessment because it's got the necessary mods. So obviously they'll sit in the original driver's seat, which is removable, and they'll then use the high level mods for the steering. So they won't be using their arms; they'll be using foot steering, for example.
Yep.
So, but the process is extended. Normally, we would like to allow a couple of hours for that on-road assessment, given the fact that we've got to interchange and work with various mods. And another thing I will say here, Brad, as well, is, and we've already emphasised this, but it's very much about, I'm always emphasising, it's a bottom-up approach from the assessment. And you use the word elimination. So we look at the mainstream modifications, and then only if those mods aren't workable do we incrementally go up. And the big one for me is, can that person use the steering wheel? We want to keep that person on the steering wheel, to the point that, we'll get someone in for an on-road and they might be able to just turn the wheel, and you can see they're fatigued, but quite often they haven't been working that motion for some time, especially if they're in a power chair.
Yep.
So we will often encourage them, look at your rehab program to see what shoulder integrity and strength you can improve upon so that you can, in 2, 3, 6 months' time, look at turning a wheel. Okay. I would rather someone build on their strength in order to turn the original wheel than for us to automatically just go straight to a mini wheel steering or joystick steering system. So, because, and there's a few reasons behind that. One, obviously, the training time involved on mini wheel joystick steering is significant. It's 30, 40, 50 hours sometimes. And also the cost of modifications is exponential as far as it's quite a significant amount more. And I've seen this firsthand on a couple of occasions where we've done an initial on-road, client couldn't turn the wheel or was able to turn it, but really compromising the integrity of the shoulder in doing so.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did a reassessment 6 months, 12 months later, bang, they were able to turn it just simply through doing a specific rehab program.
Mm-hmm.
And those clients are now driving confidently, safely for extended periods of time with a less costly, complex modification than what was originally deemed possibly necessary. So,
yeah, 100%. Look, yeah, if the expense side of it all needs to be considered for the long term as well. So, how as NDIS? Are we struggling with NDIS? Is it a good thing with NDIS? Do you just want to make a few comments about especially the van type modifications, the really high end, expensive modifications? Are there things that any advice that you could give in regards to NDIS for our clients that are listening?
Yeah, so it's I think everyone knows that listens to this podcast. NDIS, even though we're coming up to 10 years into having NDIS funding options available, there's still a long way to go with NDIS. And driving is an area where there wasn't enough thought put into it in the implementation. And we see that firsthand with the driving lessons that are sometimes required. And this is going for physical and non-physical disabilities. There hasn't been enough consultation with the industry as far as what's actually required to put safely train people. And you would see this all the time, Brad. As far as the modifications and approvals are concerned, we are seeing mainstream modifications being funded on a, without
more readily.
an issue.
More readily.
We're seeing high-level modifications also being funded. When it comes to the high level, though, there needs to be very, very clear justifications as to why that person is driving with those modifications.
Yep.
And it's gone beyond the point of now just a clinical justification. So for those who are listening to the podcast, obviously the driving OT or the occupational therapist, traditionally the education is purely about clinical justifications. Correct?
Yeah.
Now NDIS has taken it a step further, and NDIS wants the occupational therapists to provide validation as to why. All right, you've clinically justified that person can drive with those high-level modifications, but give us some other reasonings as to why we should fund those modifications for that participant.
Oh, absolutely, and I'll add a little bit more to that as well. It's fair and reasonable. Is the line from NDIS? Is it fair, equitable, and reasonable? And when we talk about that, is it value for money? So, putting in $100,000 for a round figure worth of controls into a $50,000 van that the client has to purchase themselves, is that feasible for the future? Are they going to get value for money out of it? And is that $100,000 for a round figure better spent elsewhere? And that's the question that we're having to answer in more detail, a lot more often in our OT reports. So come prepared to your OT assessment when coming to test these out, because they're the questions that we're having to answer all the time. What freedom is it going to give you? How is that going to be justified from a financial point of view? And what savings is that going to give the government, give the NDIS in the long-term picture? Just want to touch on one more thing. We mentioned it before we came on air. The vans are also awesome to let people know that there is potential to drive. Paul and I were just discussing before coming on air, we've done some assessments through time, and we never got to the point of actually applying for NDIS funding, but the client's gone away going, yeah, I could drive if I want to go down that line, because they've tested it out. They've got that knowledge inside them now that, yeah, I could do it. I could do it if I needed to and wanted to, and that can be enough. Do you see that across other states as well, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely, Brad. I'm a big advocate of, going out there, doing a trial on road with the driving instructor, with the occupational therapist, seeing if it's one, there is physical capability to drive, but two, the factor is it's not often so much the physical capability because of the likes of the joystick steering system. It's more about the willpower and the determination that person has.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I've driven with all this gear, and it's it's not easy at times. I welcome anyone to come along and that thinks that this is just a walk in the park to drive a van with joystick steering. It's not, especially when you're in, Australia provides many types of challenging driving experiences. Driving in a capital city, driving on open roads. Yeah, it's we live in a nation that's you need we want to have skilled drivers on the road, and so it's driving a van like this, it's not for everybody. So we will often come away. Brad and I have talked about it, as Brad's touched on. We come away from the on-road assessment. Clients successfully driven the vehicle for that on-road, but they haven't proceeded, and that's fine because we can put closure on it for that point in time.
Yep.
So, that's also the purpose of these vans, is to enable people to go through and be licensed and have their own vehicle fitted, but also for those people to put some form of closure. Okay, I tried it, but it wasn't for me.
Yep. Yeah. Now, look, we're going to wind up the interview now. It's been fantastic talking to you to explore what options are out there for people to test this out, to give it a go and see if it's the right fit for them. And that's exactly what I want to thank Paul personally. I've known him since, like we said, back in 2013, and kind of shared a journey through NDIS together in different worlds, but joint worlds at the same time as well. And I'm personally going to shout out to you again. Thank you very much for doing what you're doing, because for our clients, it's made a massive difference to the industry and to their hope and their desires in regarding experience that freedom that comes from driving. So thanks for everything that you're doing. We asked you last time whether you wanted to share a story of something that you've used your car for, which is more than just getting from A to B. Do you have another story that you might want to share for our people? We always wind up the podcast, but we know you've been on before. So is there something else that you've used your car for that's special that you want to share with our listeners?
I just with the evolution of vehicles, I've had the option now to drive a few Teslas that we've fitted up, and I know there's people. We've got advocates that go for the electric vehicles, and those who are in mixed minds. But for example, driving with a satellite accelerator, two hands on the wheel. Just when I first drove a Tesla with a satellite, it was quite remarkable because I was able to spend so much time two hands on the wheel because of this regenerative braking that's a feature. Obviously, I still need my brake lever, but it wasn't always coming down on the brake because the car's got the regenerative natural braking. So that's been an interesting experience that I often tell people about. The first time I drove a Tesla was quite a memorable experience because of where technology's taken us.
Yeah, well, all right, awesome. Thank you again. A huge thanks to not just coming on the podcast and sharing your story back in episode 38. Please go back and listen to that if you haven't listened to that already. There's a couple of other stories throughout this podcast journey. We've spoken to someone about joystick foot steering. Go and look for joystick foot steering when you're searching through this podcast. That was in one of the Total Ability vans. We've spoken to Mark, the driving instructor. Your story is dotted throughout this podcast as well, Paul. So thank you very much for doing everything that you're doing. If people want to know more about Total Ability, is the website the best place to go? You're on Facebook and Instagram, I'm assuming, all those wonderful social media platforms?
Yeah, I believe so.
You believe so? Total Ability. I think that's it. You've put that into a search bar and go and find all the information that you might need for all these wonderful controls. Stick around. I'm going to do the top three today. Like we said in the intro, unfortunately, Ali's not with us today. His internet broke down. So when we're talking about high level electronics, unfortunately, sometimes there's some bugs in some systems. Ali's experienced that today. I'm going to do the top three takeaways all by myself today. I've got about a top 15. I've got to narrow it down. So stick around, come back after the short little break, and I'll go through my top three takeaways. Paul, again, thank you very much. And I will see you again soon, and people can listen to this podcast and get to know you better as we move forward. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me on, Brad.
I really appreciate it. Thanks, mate. Okay, everybody, welcome back. In this section, it's normally Ali and I bringing our top three takeaways, and we bring together our more than 30 years of joint experience in the industry. But today, you've just got me because of Ali's technical issues with his computer and internet. We're going to talk about the top three. My top three today is number one. Prior to 2011 and 2013, thereabouts, there really wasn't much in the line of electronic hand controls. There was another couple of companies with a few electronic hand controls on their books, but relatively speaking, Paul changed the industry when he introduced Australia to electronic hand controls coming out of Italy and Europe and the Fardiel range. That's the number one takeaway, is that this is roughly 10 years of age from my point of view. We're talking 10 years now of experience, 2013 to 2023, when we're recording this podcast. And it's roughly the same age as the NDIS. So he was around just before the NDIS in 2011 and so on, but this really got kick-started in that 2013 period. So relatively new, but also now 10 years on, we've learned so much across that time. And I'm saying we, because I'm going to chuck myself in there. I've learned so much from Paul and all of the energy that he's brought to this industry. And I'm hoping that I might have helped him along the way a little bit as well from an OT point of view. But now we're going to talk about my second takeaway. What was really interesting back in those times, and it's still, I want to applaud him now, Paul's work with the driving instructor industry. It changed the way assessments were done. Paul invested heavily with driving instructors giving discounts or loans or benefits for driving instructors to be able to get vehicles modified so people with disabilities had something to test and try and test out. Now, in 2011 and 13, he worked heavily with the hand controls that were available at that point, and we're talking about installation into sedans. And I remember, like I made mention in the podcast, that the cost benefit analysis of putting in hand controls into my driving instructor car to be able to help people with disabilities, for me, it was a no-brainer. Had to be done. That was my industry. But for other driving instructors, when they're teaching 16-year-olds how to drive without disabilities, that cost benefit of, is it really worth putting hand controls into my car to teach that cohort of 16-year-olds or experienced drivers to get their license back? Well, he made it a very easy decision because he basically funded it for driving instructors, and he's changed the whole scope around Australia because of that initiative. So a massive shout out to him. So that's one of my major takeaways from today, and I want to thank him for that. Now, the third one is then the next step up from that. So once he had assisted getting controls into driving instructor cars, he took it to a whole new level with the modified vans that we spoke so heavily about in regards to the high level vans. You'll hear that term a lot in this industry, high level assessment vans, which means it's got high level controls in it, which means that we're really starting to talk about decreased power to be able to handle hand controls and steer a steering wheel. So we're talking about lack of power through the limbs to be able to drive a standard car. And then we're talking about what happens if you can't steer a steering wheel. And it might be foot steering, it might be joystick steering, it might be mini wheel. All of these terms you can go and have a look at the Total Ability website. So three major touching points that we wanted to highlight again as we wind up this episode. But before we do that, as you might be able to tell, I'm a major fan of Paul and the work that he's done in this industry. A massive investment that he's made to the industry by creating these vans and putting driving instructors on the road with hand controls in their cars. The industry wouldn't be where it is today without Paul's initiative and massive investment. So another personal thank you to Paul and the Total Ability team for doing what he's doing and continuing to do throughout Australia and New Zealand. That's it. That's where we're going to wind it up. As we wind up the episode, we want to do a shout out to our sponsors that make this show possible, Mobility Engineering and Williams OT, and thank them for helping you bring the interview with Paul and Total Ability today. Just as a reminder, Williams OT, driver assessments and rehab offer all the pieces of the puzzle to assist people with disabilities to reach their driving and community mobility goals. And Mobility Engineering is a team of passionate and dedicated people focused on bringing Australia's largest range of suitable transport solutions for all walks of life. If you found this episode interesting, make sure that you like it and share it with people that might find it interesting as well. And as we say in every episode, the advice provided in this podcast is general in nature. So if you have any queries about what will work for you, make sure you get in contact with your local OT or mobility dealer. And in this case, it might be Total Ability, and set yourself up with a trial, because trials really do put you in the driver's seat. That's it for this episode. Hopefully Ali's back up and running with his internet for our next episode, and we will talk to you again then. Bye-bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Drive Able podcast with Brad Williams and Ali Akbarian. If you like what you've heard, make sure you like, rate, and subscribe. It really does make a massive difference. If you or anyone you know would like to share a story about driving with a disability, or you would like to get in contact, find the show notes, or find the resources mentioned in this episode, you can find us on Facebook. Just search @Drive Able Podcast for more information.